This is a press conference about an event to take place in London on the 11th and 12th of November, Monday and Tuesday. And it's where bishops and bankers collaborate to develop the investment market for $1.75 trillion of Christian faith-aligned capital. And we're joined on the call by several people engaged in organising the conference, and others who can answer questions from journalists on the call. I'm going to start with Jean-Baptiste de Franssu, President of the Vatican Bank, and you are the co-organiser of the Mensuram Bonam conference. I wonder if I could ask you, first of all, just some brief questions to get into it, of just the nuts and bolts of what's happening. Why is it called the Mensuram Bonam conference? Just remind us of the report that it takes its title from and what that report said.
Thank you very much for hosting us today, and good afternoon to everyone. Mensuram Bonam is a publication that was released by the Pontifical Academy for Social Science back in December 2022. And the whole purpose of Mensuram Bonam was to help all those people in charge of managing assets in the church or in institutions related to the church, and I'm talking here about the Catholic Church predominantly, to manage their assets with the necessary ethical criteria, with the indispensable ethical criteria that should apply to that management. So the publication, which is about a 35, 40 pages document, was all about reminding people of the social teaching of the church that can have an implication in terms of ethical criteria that one would like to apply when managing assets. So putting together the background, drawn from the scriptures, but also from again, the social teaching of the church. And the second part of the document was a practical guide as to how should you go about implementing an investment process to manage a portfolio, and how can you integrate in that investment process the necessary ethical criteria, knowing that you have different types of approach that you could take. One is to exclude, and we may come back to this later on. You just decide that certain stock cannot be in your portfolio. One is that you enhance, you try and start to have a conversation with the management of the companies in which you are about to invest. And three, that you engage, which is in that case more than enhancement. You effectively have an ongoing dialogue with the management, and you ensure that through your investment, you're helping management and you're helping the corporation to change their course in order to take into account more of those ethical criteria. So Mensuram Bonam talks about the background, the social teaching, the scripture, and then the practicalities, taking the three steps that I've just referred to, and tries and provide those asset owner a guiding hand in this implementation.
And where is the conference being held, and why have you chosen to hold it in London?
So Mensuram Bonam was released in 2022, and I'm going to get to your point. I just do a little detour. We had a first conference last year in 2023 in Rome, where we gathered again, asset owners, people responsible of managing portfolios in the church, essentially in the Catholic Church, but also in some other Christian denomination churches in Rome. And there, for the first time, we got people to talk together. Because one of the things that we came to realize, and that's not exactly the case to the same extent in the Protestant church, but very much in the Catholic Church, there's been no dialogue amongst people responsible. So everybody does his little thing in his little corner, and nobody shares with the others. And we are trying to break this. So our first effort was an effort of communication, dialogue, and exchange. That was last year in Rome. This year, and following on some of the comments we had last year, we felt we had to engage that dialogue, not just between the people that are responsible for managing portfolio, but also with the service provider. So our idea is we need to engage into a deeper and a more constructive conversation with the service provider to the financial markets and to those in charge of managing portfolio so that there is a better understanding as to what we are expecting. And then we engage in a dialogue with those service providers as to what is it that they can do to make our life easier. And because we wanted to talk to the service provider, we decided to go to London, where most of the service providers have at least a representation, if not their home office.
So it will be investment bankers and investment managers who will come to the conference. How many are you expecting will turn up?
Well, I'd rather say investment managers. They won't be investment bankers as the way we know them. It will really be investment managers. It will be index providers, the Bloomberg of the world. It would be those performance measurement institution, the one that provides you with all the performance of your funds on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, the morning stars of the world. But there will also be the consultant, those that come in and advise you as to how you should structure your portfolio. So we are going to be about 90 people. There will be approximately 40 asset owners. In other words, people in charge of managing a portfolio on behalf of the church, directly or indirectly. And there will be about 20 of those service providers. And the rest will be many of the people that have helped us put together this conference. So, and the whole objective, there is only one. We have to talk to the service provider. We have to explain to the service provider what we need. And we have to make sure that the service provider hear what our needs are and adjust subsequently their offer.
Thank you. And we do have several journalists on the call. So I know that you're happy to take some questions shortly. If you have a question, please raise your hand or write something in the chat box so we know when to come to you. But I'm just going to introduce another speaker on the call now, Peter Hughes-Smith, the Chief Executive of CCLA Investment Management, which stands for Churches, Charities and Local Authorities Investment Management. Thank you for joining the call. Now, you're hosting the conference. Just one question to you before we then turn this conference over to the journalists. Why are you, in particular, your organisation, hosting the conference?
Thank you very much. And we're hosting the conference because CCLA was originally established out of the Church of England many years ago. And we still run a significant pool of assets for the Church of England. We also work with charities and we work with other faith denominations as well, including a lot of Catholic organizations. So we've been very engaged with the Catholic Church. And we believe this change is important. This program is important for all faith-based investors, really for two core reasons. One is most faith-based investors do not want to financially benefit from things they find inappropriate or things that are against their faith. And that's a very natural position to be in. It's very important that we as an industry can accommodate that. The other thing is that actually faith investors, by coming together, working with the right organizations, can actually drive change. They can use their money for a positive good. And Jean-Baptiste was alluding to that. So there's two really important themes that can be delivered, and we are deeply honoured to be able to host this conference on behalf of Jean-Baptiste and others in our offices here in London.
Thank you very much for joining us also. So turning the conference over to the journalists on the call, be ready with your questions. And I'm going to turn first of all to Catherine Pepinster.
Thank you, Ruth. I was intrigued by the material we were sent in advance about this event on Monday that talks about this meeting turbocharge the market investment that fits with Christian beliefs. And I guess I want to understand what turbocharging the market means. And from what I've heard so far, I think I'm gleaning that we're talking about trying to ensure people have similar criteria when they ask people with whom they place their investments to deal with them. But I'm not quite sure how that works because, for example, if you're talking about very positive investments, they're not just saying, we're not going to put our money into anything to do with pornography or weapons, but saying that you're going to encourage good things. If one body that you could invest with is backing agriculture in India, and another is finding innovative ways to grow coffee in Guatemala, isn't that choice good? Why does it have to be the same? I'm a little confused as to how this will work.
It's a very important question, Catherine, if I may. Very, very important. Let me just, before I go ultimately to your point. First and foremost, this Mensuram Bonam publication comes with a Catholic background, but we are working hand in hand with some of the Protestant church, because at the end of the day, the gospel is the gospel, and we all share the same value, even though there are certain interpretations in the Catholic Church that may not be the same in other Protestant churches. So, but at the beginning, because it has been published by the Pontifical Academy for Social Science in the Vatican, it is a Catholic document. In the Catholic Church, money is totally decentralized. In other words, at the top of the pyramid, down in the Vatican, no one can edict to anyone else what he should do with his money, whether it's a congregation somewhere in Europe, in Africa, in Asia, or whether it's a diocese somewhere in the US. It is the local responsibility. It is the responsibility of the local people to do what they believe they should be doing. And that's a very important point in the way money is managed in the church. And that applies to faith consistent investment. So what we are saying, Catherine, is not that we want to have one model that would fit all. Certainly not. Everyone may have his own sensitivity. But what we are saying is that the approach to those sensitivities should be similar in the way. But as long as you have a process, as long as taking into account your cultural background, some of the local circumstances to which you're exposed, what matters is that you put in place an ethical policy that you believe meets your values. Let me take a simpler example to get exactly to your point. The nuclear energy. And let's talk about Europe. In the principle issued in Germany by most of the dioceses, they will never invest in nuclear energy. That's the culture in Germany, and that will not happen. If you look at the French, on the other side of the border, at the French Bishop Conference, or the value expressed by many dioceses or congregations, they will invest in nuclear energy because that's part of the cultural and the economy of the country. So the ultimate decision might be different because the ultimate decision reflects different culture and different journeys. But the process is going to be the same. The need to reflect, the need to discern, the need to ask the right question to get to a portfolio that you believe is ethical and follows again, the values of the scripture, that's what matters. Now, there are points where hopefully no one will differ. If you talk about, the sanctity of life, or if you talk about some of those basic principles of the Christian faith, hopefully no one ultimately will diverge from one position to another. But that's a little bit the journey. So it is not about centralization. It is not about dictating to people what they ultimately have to do. It is to share with people the best process to follow to get to an ultimate situation that will reflect their cultural value and their local experience.
So, yes, that's interesting, that idea. It's not about centralization. So you're trying to align what different parts of the church do, but ultimately they make the decision. So, for example, the document that you talk about, Mensuram Bonam, it mentions avoiding investment in addictive substances. So one bishops' conference might decide that addictive substances would include alcohol, and another one might decide that alcohol's okay. Is that what you're talking about?
That's what I'm talking about. And one bishop conference may say, in alcohol, you have to make a difference between wine and, God knows what. Again, because you may be in a wine producing area. So the poor bishop doesn't want to have half of the congregation against him, joke apart. But that's what I'm talking about. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
But you see, the other point, Catherine, is in that conversation we're going to have Monday and Tuesday, more importantly than saying we all need to do the same thing, which is not what we want to do. But beyond this, what we are saying is collectively, those of us that manage assets for the church, we want to talk to the service provider and say, this is what we need and that we don't have today, so that we can better manage our accounts.
And you've effectively recognised that the Catholic Church and other faith groups, other Christian denominations, have the ability to have a huge amount of influence.
And today that influence is very small. I mean, Peter Hugh can speak about this much better than I do because he has a lot of exposure to many of those various churches and so on. But the influence that the Christian capital, quote unquote, for whatever it means, has on markets and on society is very limited.
Thanks.
Okay, can we move on and just bring in Cindy Wooden now here? Cindy, you're joining us from Rome, from the Catholic News Service.
Hello, thank you very much. I was just wondering about if in the 2 years since Mensuram Bonam has been published, if there's any marked change or push, have new areas of divestment been occurring, or new kind of rallying to invest in certain areas of impact investing? Has that happened? And also, several bishops' conferences that are mentioned in the documents invest in companies that may have had some problems with the environment or have not been extremely careful with their supply chain. But they say that they use their investment in these companies and engage in shareholder actions and dialogue. I guess I'm just wondering if that's an easy way out. You're still earning money off of those companies, but you have this public appearance of trying to convince them to act more ethically. I mean, I know that the people responsible for these funds also have a responsibility to grow them because they're supposed to be funding these organizations or churches. But so is anything changing? Have you noticed anything particular in the last 2 years? Thank you.
Cindy, it's a very complex subject. And the first thing we came to realize once the document was published and after we met in Rome last year is the degree of inexperience, lack of education is very, very important. Very important. And I'm now talking about the Catholic Church. I know things are different when you talk about some of the Protestant church, but in the Catholic Church, the relationship to managing money is not very strong at all. And so one of the first things that came out of the Rome conference after the publication of Mensuram Bonam, that is last year in 2023, is education. So we've been working on trying to put together some education program because the sister who is in charge of managing the money of our congregation, the brother who is in charge of managing the money of his congregation, the priest of the layperson who is in charge of managing the money of the diocese, some of them have no experience whatsoever in asset management and in managing portfolios of securities, let alone introducing in those portfolios a certain degree of ethics. Now, that's the one thing. Now, many of those people tend to outsource to banks, to asset manager, and believe that once they have outsourced, all is well. And they believe that because those banks or investment managers apply some ESG criteria, and I believe everybody understands what I mean by ESG, environmental, social, and governmental criteria, they believe that because people apply those criteria to the management of their portfolio, all is well. But again, this is not correct. The issue is how much, I mean, you if a person is in charge of managing the assets of a Catholic institution, these people have a duty to manage those portfolio respecting the values of the church. When you manage just through ESG principles, you do not automatically reflect all the principles of the Catholic Church. All this, Cindy, whether it is, how do you go about managing a portfolio? How do you go about integrating ethical criteria beyond ESG into your portfolio, requires education, requires knowledge, requires competence. And what we have found last year is that is an area where it is missing on all aspects: competence, education, and expertise. And so that's one of the first things we've been doing. So to your question, has Mensuram Bonam changed the landscape in terms of how people invest? Probably not. Probably not, but we would not have expected this. What we want to see is that the people who are in charge of managing those portfolios understand better what's their responsibility and try better to manage in a way that respects their values. And if we achieve this, Cindy, that will be already a great leap forward.
Is that okay, Cindy? Thank you. Rosie Dawson, do you have a question?
Well, two things, really. I mean, for somebody who doesn't have much financial literacy, I'm trying to think about, what the vision is here. So there are two things. I mean, one is about your approach and whether there is any, what sort of leverage you have with the people who are coming to the conference to make sure that something changes in their approach to investments. And secondly, I don't know if you can just give me a couple of examples of sort of blue skies about, what would you really like to see happen? A couple of concrete examples of what you would like to see happen coming out of this conference. What would a successful result? Might just be a small one, but what would it look like? But I kind of need some sort of clothes put on the clothes horse, if you know what I mean, to sort of understand what it is that you're doing here.
Okay, very good question, Rosie. Thank you for those. First of all, why would the service provider be interested to talk to us? And why would the service provider be interested to better serve us? Because there is a lot of money to be made. Because we represent a significant amount of investable assets, which is not well served today. Let me take a couple of examples which will also respond to the second part of your question. If you go onto Morningstar, I don't know how familiar you are with a tool called Morningstar. It's an institute that provides you regular fund performance information. So if you have invested yourself in a fund and you want to know how it's doing versus competition, you go on their website, you type the name of your fund, and it's going to tell you whether it's good, bad, average, and why, and so on and so forth. So this is a very, very important institution in the world of asset management because everybody uses it to compare the performance of each fund versus others. Now, and the way they organize themselves is they categorize fund. So they say, these are European equities, these are American equities, these are government bonds, these are emerging market bonds. So they classify all those products. But they also have products called Sharia compliant fund, Sharia for the Muslim world. Now, if you type Sharia compliant fund, you're going to have long list of product appearing. Now go and type Christian funds. Hardly no fund comes up because they have never thought that this market was an appealing market. And this market was, if it was to be better organized, they could be making better money. And that's what we're going to be telling them on Monday and Tuesday. Look who we are. We may have been incompetent in the past. We may not have had the skills nor the level of professionalism required, but we're trying to get better. And whilst we're trying to get better, we need your help to provide us with the right level of services. So I spoke about measuring investment performance of funds, but indices. Today, if you look around the Bloomberg of the world, you're going to find all sorts of Christian index, but none of them is the same. They all have some differences. Can we try and rationalize this a bit? Can we try and say, all right, okay, there's a basic minimum of stuff.
Might that minimum include something like, not investing in fossil fuels or, some particular environmental standards?
Absolutely. We could have a Christian index provided by Bloomberg that would say, in that index, you have no exposure to fossil fuel. And that might happen if the service provider understands that there is a demand out there. the Sharia compliant fund don't care about fossil fuel. So they are not going to create, indices without fossil fuel for the Sharia world. But for the Christian world, if we express what we want, that may happen. And to your last point, we have said to the service providers that are coming, that they are coming on the basis that they make a commitment. We have 4 working groups on the Tuesday on the basic that they will agree one solution, at least one solution each on the problem that will be put forward to them. So they are coming with a committed ambition. Now maybe we won't succeed. It's always possible, but everybody comes here with the will to do something.
Thank you.
Well, I just intervene here because in the material that we were given about the conference, there are some eye-watering numbers here. I mean, we did mention this at the beginning, but there are an estimated $1.75 trillion in assets held by Christian institutions. But in the Islamic finance industry, which you mentioned just a moment ago, this is expected to grow to $6.7 trillion by 2027. Is that the kind of escalation of increase that you'd be seeking to achieve through this conference?
No, I don't think we are. We're not looking for growth, quote unquote. I mean, it's interesting to look at the Muslim number and the Sharia funds. It's about 4 something trillion today, going on to 6. There's many reasons behind, and notably the oil. All the oil-rich countries of Muslim denomination behind this. In our case, we're not looking for growth. That's not our subject. That's not our purpose of Monday and Tuesday. The purpose of Monday and Tuesday is to better manage what we have, better manage, more professionally manage, more ethically manage what we have. That's really what's driving Monday and Tuesday next week.
Thank you. Can I go to Susie Weldon next? Then we'll come back to you, Cindy. But Susie Weldon next from Faith Invest.
Hello, thank you very much. One of my colleagues will be at your conference next week, and we're very much looking forward to it. I was just wondering if you have come up with a menu or a recipe of requests or demands when it comes to the service providers. I mean, when you're talking to the service providers, what will you tell them about the particular needs that they can help support faith groups on? And is the fact that we're not talking about one block, there's no one size fits all. Every faith group will have its own particular priorities of focus when it comes to their investments. And I'm wondering how much of a problem that is. It isn't a simple one size fits all. If I could just add, I wonder if you have any idea of what the faith groups have to do to help the service providers improve what they're offering.
They have to become slightly more professional than what they are today in most cases. So it's the education process that we spoke about earlier on. We've got to engage them in that educational process. We need to be able to teach them that, what does it mean to manage more professionally a portfolio? What does it mean to choose the right intermediary when you manage your portfolio? What does it mean to include in the process of managing your portfolio some ethical criteria? Absolutely. This is absolutely correct. That's what we need to do. But going back to Monday and Tuesday conference and the service provider, I think best is we talk on Tuesday evening, and I'll tell you what is it exactly that we've managed to agree with the service provider. I'm slightly exaggerating because we have spoken already to the service provider, and we've sort of laid down some directions where we would like to go. But it doesn't mean automatically that everybody will agree. And also on your point that everybody is not expecting exactly the same thing. Well, that's back to Catherine's question earlier on. It's not one size fits all. There's going to be many different perspectives. Let's focus on the points where we are meeting. Let's not focus on the points where there is too big of a distance between what people would like to do. So let's focus on what gets us closer. Let's bring more professionalism. Let's bring more expertise. And collectively, let's try and get the service provider to provide us with better services on those points where we agree.
We'll go to Cindy Wooden. Cindy, you had your hand up with a further question.
Yeah. So mine is kind of a follow-up on Susie's question. And I was hoping that Peter Hugh Smith could talk about this a little bit. like, or what would be kind of the minimum basic characteristics of an ethically Christian fund? I mean, I know we might differ on whether or not you can invest in a company that makes, abortion drugs or something. But what would you see from your experience as kind of the common ground minimum requirements?
Thank you. So let me try and take that. Firstly, I don't do well. Hopefully, with these sort of conferences, and it's not just this conference, others, we will get closer to identifying some of the common grounds, so plural, because I don't think you can ever get to a totally common grounds. Let me pose an example, if I may. So you mentioned that. So let's say two different sorts of companies. We could say a pharmaceutical company that makes abortion drugs, versus, and then also an oil. So let's use the obvious one: an oil major that's pumping oil out of the ground. Two very different companies. Now, I think for Catholic investors, for your Catholic investors, they're going to go, we don't want to invest in the pharmaceuticals company. Full stop. I think that's not a big challenge. That's common ground that's actually well understood. But then the oil company, I think, is more complex, because that's more of a lot of people say we don't want to invest in oil, but there are also people say we are happy to invest in oil, and there is not the same clarity around oil or carbon pollution, environmental issues in many faiths as there are about things like abortion or sanctity of life. So again, there's always that variability of what different people want. So I think what's really important is two things. One is that people of faith, not just Catholic, but other faiths as well, work together and help define what is and what is not important to groups of them. And you could have different groups of definitions for different groups of people within certain faiths. And also then the finance industry, and that includes firms like ours at CCLA, can develop solutions, services, products that align. So if there, for example, is a congregation in, I'll just pick France, with €1 million to invest, and they want to go and find a fund that they can invest in that aligns with their beliefs, that actually the industry can say, here are some funds, and through something like Morningstar, here we can identify which ones may align to my beliefs. At the moment, it's virtually impossible for someone, particularly with a smaller sum of money, unless they're a big institution, to identify easily a solution that meets their faith needs. And I think that's the market failure, if you will, that is out there, that we are, the Mensuram Bonam as a document in this conference, as a part of that, is trying to fix, but it's going to take time. It's not a quick fix.
What about, though, the more trendy impact investing? Are there specific kind of impact investing funds as well?
Yes, there are. I mean, I think, there's a number of those. Again, there's probably not that many which are specifically aligned to Catholic social teaching, or at least not that I'm aware of. They may exist. And I think one of the questions that people need to think about before they invest is, if you invest in a fund which is already investing in businesses that are, let's use the environmental one, are green, actually, you're not then benefiting from dirty behaviors, carbon, etc., but you aren't actually changing the world. And if that's what you want, that's fine. But then also, the view we generally take is we are happy to invest in firms that are far from perfect, and then engaging with them to make them better. Now, I'm not saying which is more about engagement, which was something Jean-Baptiste talked about at the beginning. So I'm not saying one is better than the other. They're just different. And we need to, as an industry, we need to make sure that we can communicate that, explain that to people who might be looking for a solution, so people can make informed choices rather than uninformed choices.
Thank you. I think we've got room for just one more question, and that is from Catherine, please.
Thank you. I think my question is probably for Jean-Baptiste. Your eye-watering figure of $1.75 trillion of Christian faith-aligned capital, I wanted to ask if that would include pension funds. If it doesn't, presumably pension funds are another area where you could make an impact if you encouraged this kind of more ethical investing. And I also wondered to what extent you might urge individual Catholics to think seriously about Mensuram Bonam and looking at their own investing and where they place their own savings and pensions.
Spot on, Catherine, on the 2 points. First of all, the numbers are not totally scientifically 100% reliable. These are calculations that were done separately in Europe and in the US, following the same type of approach. But it is not a long quantitative process that have taken many scientists to come down to that number. However, in both cases, in Europe and in the US, it includes retail money. In other words, in the number that you've just quoted, it includes Mr. and Mrs. X, who are Catholic, who have savings, and who today might or might not invest their saving whilst meeting the values of their faith. So the retail money is involved, the pension money is involved, but I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly what's the percentage of pension money is in that number. So the number is a global number. But you see, and that's why your question is so important, Catherine, nobody as yet in the world has done an extensive research on identifying exactly what is the total amount of money that the Christian world represents. Because I'm talking essentially of liquid securities, but you also have all the issue of real estate, all the real estate that is owned by the churches. And so that's another discussion that we will need to have one day. But whilst I understand that the way in which people got to the 4 trillion of assets for the Muslim world is probably more of a scientific approach than the numbers we have come up with in Europe and in the US for the Christian world. But that's an indication. It has been confirmed by some other numbers that we've seen here and there. But certainly it needs to be looked into more detail. Certainly it needs to extract the pension side of that money. Certainly it needs to extract more the retail side. But it is very important that one should also consider that if you look at the UK mutual fund industry, or if you look at the UCITS fund industry in Europe, or if you look at the US mutual funds in Europe, there are hardly any Christian funds. There are hardly any Catholic fund. It hardly exists. In my responsibility in managing the assets at the Vatican Bank, we are trying to buy third-party funds because it's much easier for us to buy a fund managed by a great firm who has a long experience, lots of resources, much more than what we'd have, rather than managing the money ourselves directly. Very, very difficult. Very difficult. We probably have 20 or 30 funds in Europe that meets our ethical criteria that we could invest in. It's very, very small.
Out of how many? You just
thousands.
said 20 or 30 out of thousands.
Thousands and thousands of funds. So it's a very, very small minority. And we need to grow this. But we will grow this by making the investor, the asset owner, the Catholic institution linked directly or indirectly to the church, more educated, more professional, more competent. And if we get the service provider to respond to our needs with concrete and practical solutions that we do not automatically have today. If I want to buy a fund which has strict Christian or Catholic values, and I go onto this Morningstar platform that I mentioned earlier on, I can't find the funds because they don't have that category. Now, if they create that category, it's going to make my life as an investor much easier.
Can you make use of the Sharia funds in the meantime?
No, because they are, I mean, look, I never thought about it, and I've never looked into all the details. But I'm not automatically sure that we would share all the principles that drive their investments. But something to be looked at.
Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us, and thank you to Jean-Baptiste and to Peter Hughes-Smith. And I look forward to finding out what happens at your conference next week. Thank you very much indeed for joining.